Dark Souls 1, if you have not heard of it, is an unforgiving RPG set in a dark and brooding world, with the only relief being the warm rays of sunlight that scarcely pierce the darkness. The world's gritty story and unmatched immersion lead many people to believe it is one of the best RPGs ever made. The original Dark Souls 1 has advanced physics and combat only seen in Demon Souls before it. This time in a fully fleshed out, uninstanced world, with a deep story full of intriguing characters that give clues about the mysterious world we find ourselves in. This immersive world that reinforces itself is what From Software misstepped in with the games that followed. You see, in the original Dark Souls 1, we are the Dark Souls, all of us desperate to keep our humanity, some honorably and some dishonorably. This plays out in some storylines, but mostly plays out in the game's multiplayer systems.
But then there was fire, and with fire came disparity. Heat and cold, life and death, and of course, light and dark. Then from the dark, they came.
No matter if you considered yourself good or evil, the cards were always stacked against us, which left us constantly weighing the options of rushing the boss now, or taking the time to summon and risk being invaded by a soul desperate for our humanity. Despite the desperate nature and fear, we all pushed forward, because after all, we are heroes, or villains, aren't we? At the start of the game, we all pick a class, and as we play, every time we lost, the world seemed darker and more unforgiving. But every time we won, whether we invaded or were invaded, we became the night or dark night that we created. This is what I meant by a world that reinforces itself. We are playing Dark Souls, but we are also the Dark Souls trying desperately to keep our humanity.
In a walled-off land far to the north, a great king built a great kingdom.
And this isn't by chance, which we know because it was hard-coded into Demon Souls with its light and dark world system. But in Dark Souls 1, From Software brilliantly designed it into the experience itself, which is almost poetic.
Once branded, the symbol of the curse, an augur of darkness. Your past, your future, your very light. By then, you'll be something other than human. A thing that feeds on souls, a hollow.
If you do not play Dark Souls 1 or Red Phantoms in it, you're probably not going to know much of what I tell you next. The way invasions worked in Dark Souls 1 is that you could invade anyone around your level and anyone above you infinitely. The dark design, where you could invade people at any level above you, is what spawned the no level and no hit runs that made the game famous. It not only created a new way to master the game, but by completing the game at level 1, you could play with anyone in the game. By doing this and embracing your cursed existence, it gave you the choice of every weapon and magic in the game, which made it easier to compete with your high-level opponents in PvP. But it was not exactly giving up on humanity, because the skill you gained on your journey allowed you to carry nearly anyone through the game's bosses. This allowed the player to dive even deeper into the fantasy they chose. This created a very strong PvP community that would form fight clubs daily and test builds and skills. These same players also kept PvP and co-op alive for years.
Perhaps you're familiar. No, how could you be?
Now, for the issues with the games that came after Dark Souls 1. Dark Souls 2 introduced Twin Blades, which had physics that did not fit the rest of the game, bonfire levels, and soul memory system that limited where you could realistically find PvP. This funneled everyone together in a few places and fractured the player base everywhere else. This resulted in the PvE system being fractured, but okay, and the PvP system being okay in very limited places. To band-aid this, they added the arena, but anyone that took part in the fight clubs knows that it's the fight clubs without any of the community aspects. This continued in Dark Souls 3, and while they unfragmented the game world in some aspects, they added direct level range restrictions, weapon level restrictions, and a one-time PvP flag until you reset the world that made it even more restrictive than previous titles. In Bloodborne and beyond, if the game had PvP, it had all the former restrictions, as well as now a restriction system where you could only enter PvP against 2 players, which killed the PvP community almost entirely. If you didn't think it could get any worse, let's talk about Elden Ring. Elden Ring has all the previous restrictions and then some, due to the poor design and lazy development. Many of the weapon skills are blanket area of effects, meaning they have no physics. The ability tracking is so strong it will allow you to do a 180 mid-air. The world is so large and empty, which fragments the player base, and even if you can find someone to invade, chances are you won't find them in the zone unless they want to be found. When you do, you have a 2v1 or a 3v1 fight on your hands. Even if the matchmaking worked perfectly, the PvP environment is so buggy and broken that it's hardly worth playing.
Only in the ancient legends it is stated that one day an undead shall be chosen. To leave the undead asylum in pilgrimage to the land of the ancient lords.
The fallen leaves tell a story. The great Elden Ring was shattered.
Thus began the Age of Fire. But soon the flames will fade, and only dark will remain. Even now, there are only embers, and amongst the living are seen carriers of the accursed dark side.
Hey guys, if I missed anything, leave it in the comments, and like and subscribe.